You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. And this week, we have a fairly unique conversation to have with a fairly unique sales agent in the market. It's Danielle Geagea from Geagea Property. And I'd say off the bat, she's not a number one agent in any suburb. She isn't a generalist in terms of just taking a listing wherever she can. She stands out to me as, and I think to a lot of people in this industry, as a sales agent in Western Australia who has a finger on the pulse and seems to attract some of the most beautiful, iconic, and exciting houses in Western Australia. I'd say most owner-occupied homes, but properties where you look at the listing, you go, oh, what a house. Yup, Danielle's selling it. It seems to be a bit of a theme in the Perth market these days, and I thought I need to have a chat to this impressive woman about her story, how she got there, and how she ended up being the go-to agent in WA for those unique houses we see in the newspaper. How you going, Danielle?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me, Trent. That's awesome.
Well, thanks for coming in because I think it's a fun, cool chat to have today. There might not be a whole bunch of statistics. We're not going to do a suburb spotlight like we do with everyone else in the agent space. We're going to talk some stories. And the first story I wanted to hear is, where did you start? Because I don't think anyone starts as a specialist or an expert. They're sort of just having a crack when they're young. Yeah. But you started really young, especially if I can say for a young woman. It's a bit of a tough ask for girls to be taken seriously in a lot of industries, especially when they're in their teenage years.
Yeah.
But you got a tap on the shoulder and it started pretty young for you. It's 20 years later, look where you are now.
The short version is I started actually when I was 19, believe it or not. I'm 42 today. Look, long story short, I actually started in commercial real estate and I was quite literally tapped on the shoulder. I was working in retail at the time, trying to find my path forward in business and working out what that chapter was going to look like. And a gentleman came up to me at my place of work at the time and said, look, I think you'd be good in real estate. Do you want to have a coffee? And I did. Long story short, he actually paid for me to do my registration at the time with REWA and started working alongside him, assisting him in the commercial real estate space.
What do you think he saw in a 19-year-old girl who should probably be at uni?
I don't know. Look, I was pretty tenacious, I think. I was in sales, so that's what I was doing at the time, and good conversation maker and quite used to stepping up. A lot of my clientele was sort of high net worth individuals, and yeah, perhaps it struck a chord.
Commercial leasing, it's not where you are today.
No, I've gone far from that now. So what is it, 22 years later? I specialise in selling design-led homes. So I've got a residential real estate agency, as you said, Geagea Property, which I founded in 2013.
So there's a gap there. There's a 10-year gap. I guess your apprenticeship.
Yeah, look,
what did it look like?
So look, Grant and I worked together for 8-9 years, and we did everything from commercial leasing, selling office buildings, development sites, selling sites to developers and architects, and then on selling those projects off the plan. So I sort of cut my teeth, to be honest, on a incredibly diverse range of real estate. I mean, our portfolio that we were working on was so vast.
But commercial, it sounds.
It started as commercial, and then I guess as we was crossing over those tiers from sort of, we'd sell a site which was perhaps mixed use, and then we'd go, well, why don't we sell the off-the-plan product? And so there was this transition into that sort of residential space.
And you didn't want to stay in that more commercially minded space. It's even more of a jump to go from commercial all the way through to this iconic owner-occupied niche within the residential market.
Yeah, look, it is a big jump. I think, to be honest, I learned so much. I think even when I approach what I do today with residential real estate, I think it genuinely and naturally comes with this much broader understanding of property. And I still do love commercial on a personal level when it comes to my own sort of personal circumstances. But in terms of what I love doing is selling homes.
And when did that become apparent to you? Because obviously it wasn't a linear build-up for you where your boss was selling these houses and you thought, well, I'll just do it as well.
Yeah.
You've obviously had that in the back of your mind for a while, a gap in what you were doing on a daily basis.
Totally.
What spurred you to make what I would assume is a pretty scary jump?
There was a client that we had actually, and he was also an architect and a pretty cool cat. We sold some sites to this guy, and long story short, he became a bit of a mentor for me and created some beautiful buildings around Perth, and one of them was the Box building. There was another building at 8 Victoria Avenue. And I guess through that process of understanding, I mean, we'd catch up sort of every Friday, we'd go and have lunch and we'd talk architecture, design, style, trends, all that sort of stuff. There was something about him that I liked.
He was scratching an itch.
Yeah, absolutely. He was an architect, but he was developing and he was combining both design and real estate. And effectively, I started sort of selling most of his opportunities that he brought to market. And I mean, I was always interested in design though. Like I'd go to the newsagent, buy every sort of design architecture magazine that I could get my hands on. I actually studied design as well at TAFE for quite some time too in my 20s. So there was a natural interest in it. I think it was just a case of working out how I would eventually sort of merge those two worlds.
I think the luckiest people in the world are the ones who do end up being self-aware enough to figure out where their true passions lie and then actually being able to act on that. I think most young people end up in a job that is the first opportunity they get, or someone taps them on the shoulder and defines what their pathway looks like when they're young. And if you're really lucky, it actually ends up aligning with your passion. But most of the time I think it doesn't. And for most people, it never does. And it's just a job and people work to live. Unfortunately, that's, I think, most people in the world don't feel that agency to make a difference. But you obviously had that burning thing in the back of your mind where you've been tapped on the shoulder. You're close enough to where your interests lie, but not perfect. It hasn't worked out perfectly, but you've become self-aware enough to go, well, look, let's make the shift. And you
Absolutely.
did it.
I think the other thing too, and to be honest, I was always conscious of this. I think when you get into real estate, and particularly when you start sort of selling residential, you listen to the various coaches out there in the world, and it's like farm a patch. That is the typical story. And
suburb specialist.
Absolutely. Ultimately bombard those letterboxes, get those signboards up, and eventually, you'll dominate.
The saturation.
And correct. And I guess to be fair, from a business perspective, it is probably the quickest and easiest way to get into the market and have some market share. But I guess for me, I would say to myself, like, I don't want that. And it's not that, don't get me wrong, we don't want to dominate some particular locations, but I guess it was I never wanted to be
the Danielle specialist.
Correct.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a product specialist, not a patch specialist. The gentleman that got me into real estate, the other part of that story was that he was also a licensed valuer. And so I got taught how to really value real estate. And from my perspective, if you're good at what you do, you should be able to go into any suburb, understand the market, do your research, understand what something should sell for. But then I guess on top of that, you put your salesman cap on and go, okay, how do we sell it? And how do we sell it for the highest price point possible? From that perspective, I was never put off by going into areas. Like, I would so confidently go into a suburb and think, you know what, we're going to kick a goal. We're going to kick it out of the park. And we do that every time.
You started Geagea Property, it sounds like, when you were 30.
Yeah, I guess I would have been.
What's it like being a 30-year-old woman starting your own real estate agency? I'd say you'd be one in a million.
Look, to be honest, it was super exciting, I think, at the time. It was a culmination of all my experience coming together and finally sort of channeling that energy into my own vibe, my own brand. Started from a home office, and yet it was exciting. Yeah, absolutely. I knew that in order to be true to myself, I couldn't work for one of the majors. I couldn't go all the franchises, you know them all, and there's nothing wrong with them, and they have wonderful product systems and all that sort of stuff. But I'm a nonconformist. I couldn't do it. I had to do my own thing and be nimble with that, be able to make quick decisions, be able to have a brand that really stood for quality and was able to market these homes in what I considered the best possible way.
One thing I've also noticed about the brand is that whilst it is, I think, quite a strong brand in Perth and quite noticeable, I see it a lot, it's really you. Over 11 years, a lot of people who start an agency would have probably scaled and got a whole bunch of other agents under there, maybe thought about a second office. You've really kept the buck stopping with you that whole time. Bit of pressure to keep the listings coming in, especially when you operate within a niche.
There was a bit of conscious decision making around that at certain iterations of Geagea, I guess. Now we're kind of in a different place, though. Now we are in that consideration of scale and what that looks like. But I think everyone has their journey, and to be fair, when I started Geagea, it was still being iterated. I was still working out, I guess, how to consolidate my love of design and channel that into the stock that we sold. And really, I think it was probably about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, where that all sort of started to come together. And I think today what we're living through within the brand is very much a really crystallised, clear messaging which is what we've got today, which is, specialists in selling design-led homes. When we first started, we were sort of selling, well, I guess our agency was sort of in the city itself, in the CBD, and we were selling, apartments and houses sort of together, and we still sell apartments today. But it was
I assume when you're starting out, you sell whatever you can sell too.
Totally. I mean, at crikey, I just had to keep the lights on and pay the bills. The brand had, I guess, a glamorous look and feel, but behind the scenes, I was running like the clappers.
Yeah, it probably doesn't mean much until it does. And
no.
I think what happens is it often takes hitting a critical mass of your client base, your market base of brand recognition before the market tells you what you are.
Exactly. It was all about getting really clear on what we did, what I brought to the table, what the passions were, and how to really articulate that and be so crystal clear in your messaging and your value system that getting that right and nailing that down, all of a sudden, I guess, we were clear to the market, and then the market reflected back to us really clearly as well. And I think it was that moment, which was a few years ago now, that everything has, I guess, started to hit a bit of a tipping point.
When we first met, I had to ask you, one of the first questions was, do you turn down all the average properties these days? Because it seems like the only properties you sell are really iconic or at least beautiful homes. That's a testament to the brand, but also talks to the fact that the market comes to you, right? When you've got listings for iconic and beautiful homes, you can't just be hand-picking these with a letterbox drop, right?
Yeah.
So they have to be coming to you. It's a pull situation rather than a push situation in this case.
Yeah.
And you're also, I guess, whenever you were doing that, competing with naturally the number one or two agent in the suburb. So what do you think is that point of difference at your sales pitch when you're trying to get the listing and they're giving you an opportunity and saying, well, look, you're not the number one agent in the area. Steve Smith is. He sold 70 properties and you've sold 8 in this suburb this year. How are you representing yourself in that space to actually get that listing?
We make it, and I make it really crystal clear as to the value that we bring to the table. We are genuine product specialists. I mean, I don't know that there's an agent out there, and it comes to architecture and design, it's something that we are so good at articulating. It's something that I actually genuinely understand.
Well, that's why I have you in here. 'Cause I actually don't think there is another agency in Perth that focuses purely on beautiful iconic houses rather than a price point or a location.
Yeah, that's it. We go through a series of presentation and a process of educating potential would-be client as to what we can actually do for them. In fact, our pitch is really not about us, it's more about them and helping them understand how uniquely aligned we actually are. And I think once they see that, and to be fair, generally speaking, when I'm in that room, they already know that there's an alignment anyway.
That's why I called you.
Yeah, they've already sort of called me. I'm there on that premise regardless. And so whilst I will still always go through, I'm very thorough in our process and our pitch so that there's no stone left unturned in terms of deliverables. I sort of don't really have to do the sell because they are a certain type of person that has a certain type of home and they want a certain type of agent to be able to make sure that it is presented in the manner that they think reflects them and their home.
Yeah, and it comes down even just to the styling of the signboards and all those things. Isn't that interesting these days?
Yeah.
Where you have that theme running all the way through. When I talk about quality and iconic homes, it might sound quite blasé, but you hear of famous homes in Western Australia, famous architects, and one of them is a man that a lot of people my age and up probably have recognised. Seen it in Perth now in the newspapers, these iconic homes from Ivan Ivanoff. And a lot of people that listen would all be too young for these, but you would have noticed these houses without realising them. They're very interesting, unique homes, and you seem to these days be selling most of them that come to market. How does that happen?
Well, it's two things. It's part attraction, as in they have found out about us through that sort of referral network.
They know they've got an Ivanov house. They
correct.
want to see who was the agent that sold the last one.
That's right, exactly right. So they do their own due diligence. But I'm also very connected to the design community too. And this is the other thing, that going back to my story and how this has developed over time, like I've put the blood, sweat and tears in, met these homeowners, I've spent time with these people. You build relationships over time where they know that, of course, you're in sales, you're a real estate agent, but you actually genuinely care about their home. And I do, you know, when it comes to Ivanoff homes and a lot of architectural property, to be honest. When I see homes, parking the Ivanoff story for a second, you know, that are pitched to the market and just have missed the mark on marketing, have missed the mark on articulating their story, like it actually bugs me. I do care about these homes. And so when I'm given an opportunity to represent someone like Ivan Ivanoff and his genius, I actually take it quite seriously. You know, I want to do a great job.
So what's different about selling a home that is iconic, is architecturally designed, is beautiful? What are the dynamics there compared to the dynamics of selling a really nice Webb and Brown Neves home?
I guess it all comes down to result. If you're doing it from a sales perspective and you're trying to get the highest and best price for your client and knock it out of the park, you have to know your stuff. You have to know that product. You're not just selling a 4x2 in Dianella or a 3x2 in Cottesloe or a 5-bedroom home in City Beach. You've got to understand the craft of Ivanhoe. You've got to be able to tell the story, and I think it transcends from just selling real estate to actually selling a story. The benefits of the design, why he did what he did. I mean, I do a huge amount of research when it comes to listing these homes, be it Ivanhoe or a contemporary architect, in actually genuinely understanding the property, how it functions, why those decisions were made, what was that brief, all of it, absolutely. And that messaging, we are very specific when we create the narrative and the copy for our properties, but we're also very specific when we are there on the day in person having these engaged conversations, because I think design can be aspirational. Not everybody understands design, and it's also...
Or appreciates it.
Correct, absolutely. And the amount of times that I've had people who have bought properties who didn't... I mean, my first Ivanhoe, I think it was my first that I sold, the people who bought it didn't...
Where was it?
That was in Menora, Frank House. It was actually really sort of unassuming, quite a subtle 60s house, 1969 I think off the top of my head. Really lovely, flat roof, lovely setback, long lawn, ponytail tree out the front, sort of very sort of classic 1960s style, but very modest in terms of its footprint. But the gentleman in the family who bought it had no idea about Ivanhoe, had never heard of him at all, but loved learning the story. And part of that narrative was what they bought into, aside from actually loving the home. They wanted to be a part of that legacy and a part of that message.
Most of the time, architecturally designed homes, they command a higher price. Mm-hmm. The seller wants a higher price. They know what they've got most of the time, and they want more for what really is often the same sized home, the same amount of bricks, same bedrooms, than a house down the road that might sell for 20, 30, 40% less. And that, I guess, niches the market a lot of the time. Do you find that when you're bringing these homes to market and you're possibly putting them to market for a higher price than the house next door would be, where the utility is the same in a way, that the buyer pool is different too? Are they people who appreciate it from the start, or are you often having to convince people why this property is 30% more than the one next door that has the same size footprint?
Great question. It's a bit of both. I think it depends. Certain homes tick both boxes of architecture and design and practicality. Some are not as practical, for sure. I would safely say that the buyer pool tends to thin out a bit more. I think typically unique homes call for unique buyers, not always, but often. And so again, that's why it becomes so important as a selling agent to know your craft, because you have to work harder. We often sort of say in the office, sometimes we'll have a more kind of mainstream home, which we might have sold for an existing client, and you'll have people lining up. You'll have, 2-3 times the offers that might be put on perhaps more of an architectural unique offering.
Which is frustrating.
But yet it's so interesting. And I guess, and that's okay, because not everybody gets design and not everybody wants to live that way. And I think the other thing too with design is often those homes have obviously been designed for a particular family and a particular client in mind, and so they become quite specific in terms of style, which aren't going to suit everybody. But it's our job, I guess, to find those buyers and actually make that match.
Do you find these days you have a bit of a buyer pool following you?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. We've got a wonderfully engaged audience, both our database, social media, and Saturdays actually become really fun. We have people, honestly, they come to all of our home opens and they cross suburbs. They go from Fremantle to Mount Lawley to City Beach, wherever we are, they actually come.
Show.
It is. It's like a design roadshow on Saturdays and Sundays. It's a heck of a lot of fun, actually.
How have you found the dynamic in terms of days on market, people rocking up at the home opens? How has that been this year? And then as an extension in the last couple of months, as we have seen a little bit of a change in the broader market of really stock on market, a few more options available for people. Demand in Perth has remained the same. Actually, it's increased about 15% in the last 3 weeks from winter. I think because there are more options, there is more stock, and therefore more buyers. The buyers can buy now. They've found something they like. I've seen a lot of people executing on their pre-approvals. But we are back to 5,000 properties on the market again. So how's that been?
We've noticed a shift recently, definitely. I think we have noticed that the buying cycle is seemingly taking a little bit longer. So we were finding that most of our homes sort of come earlier this year. We're generally transacting sort of within the first week to 2 weeks.
Even with those more expensive
Yeah, look, even with those. I mean, look, there are anomalies. I mean, we had a couple of properties and one in particular this year that took about 8 weeks to sell. But the messaging and the interesting factor about that is we never changed our price because I knew we would get it. And so it wasn't a case of, well, we've overcooked it on value. We just, again, had to find those right buyers because it was a particularly unique home. But no, look, in general terms, most of our design-led products do sell quite quickly. And they continue to do so, I guess, because we do genuinely get very sort of strong marketing out there and press. And however, there are homes, I guess, that sometimes can take a little bit longer for people to kind of get their head around. And I guess, as you say, certainly over the last probably couple of months, we've noticed just a slight shift in that buying cycle. People will come to a home. Obviously, there's a few more options out there now, so they're wanting to canvass what those options are. Whereas, I guess a few months back, there were really no other option. It was correct, and
whatever comes on the market with enough bedrooms in the right suburb, throw an offer down.
But I guess what's good about what we do is that we always have to work really hard with those buyers anyway, and so that little sort of subtle shift in the market doesn't concern me because we are used to actually having to. We're not just key turners. We don't just open doors and the homes just sell themselves. We have to sell. We have to educate. And so we're already all very versed at doing that, which I guess, most agents will find now in moving forward, they're going to have to work a little bit harder to get those sales.
Yeah, they have to actually have some skill.
Correct.
That's not to suggest that I expect we're going to be anywhere near where we were pre-COVID. I think every agent in Perth would still love to be in this situation, and I would posit that it actually will remain this tight, if not get tighter again as interest rates drop next year. But that helps me segue to the question of, do you think price expectations for sellers have risen to a point in a lot of spaces where it's challenging the buyer pool to afford what people are after?
To some extent, I think. Look, certainly our vendors have been wanting to capitalise on those upward trends that we've been seeing, particularly in the last 12 months. Yeah, it's going to push people, it's going to put pressure on those people, sort of would-be buyers who would perhaps they were in that sort of price segment maybe 12 months ago, who are no longer in that segment.
Offer within 12 hours
that's
at
right.
1.5, but 1.9, oh man,
correct,
I need some money from mum and dad.
That's right. And I guess obviously, incomes haven't been going up in the same trend as property prices. So 100% there are segments of the market that I think are feeling the pressure, and we've lost buyers that otherwise would have been around. But I guess what do? You just have to find new buyers. When we list properties for sale, I'm very conscious of getting pricing right to begin with. I don't believe in overcooking price. I believe in getting the highest price possible and pushing it. But I think any home that is fairly priced ultimately should be able to sell. It's just you've got to get those buyers.
When you've got 5,000 properties on the market, 98,000 people coming into your estate every year at the moment, and a fifth of those properties on the market being transacted every week, as long as it's priced fairly, all these properties should be selling within a month.
That's it.
And if it's taking longer, it is either a really niche property in possibly a niche area, or it's overpriced. That's the only thing it can be right now, because the buyer pool is still bigger than it was in the last mining boom, which is a fabled time.
Absolutely.
So to pique the interest of those design roadshow people that literally like driving the streets looking for sexy houses to appreciate from the front verge, can you give us a couple of addresses of properties that you've looked at and gone, wow, what a home?
Yeah, we've had the benefit of selling some absolute cracker, beautiful homes this year. And there's a couple of homes, I think, that kind of, for differing reasons, both aesthetic quality but also just the level of interest that we had in them. There was a property that we actually sold earlier this year called Shadow House by Grotto Studio.
It had a name.
Yeah, all of our houses have names. Yeah. And if not, we give them one. But no, genuinely, they already have names. But this is called Shadow House, and really unassuming street in Bayswater, actually. And beautiful little 1900s character cottage, which had what was the most beautifully yet subtly designed extension to the back. And anyway, we had, obviously we got multiple offers on it, but our Saturdays and Sundays there were absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we had, during the space of a 30-minute home open on both Saturday and Sunday, we had 250 people through both of those days. Wow. And it was absolutely nuts.
That's a big cleaning bill.
I'm sure there was a few footprints to clean up for the vendors, but got a great result.
What was the address there?
Arundel Road, number 27. from memory. But if anyone looks up Shadow House by Grotto Studio, a great designer, Craig, put that together, and it really is an exceptional home. In fact, it just won a design award. I think it was last week or the week before. That was a special home, and it was a special client. They love design, and again, they wanted an agent who would just get the home and make them feel proud, which I hope that we did. Featherby House early this year as well, which was an Ivanoff. That was a beautifully restored 1970s Ivanoff's white concrete Besser block that had been painted white, home in Karrinyup, opposite the Lake Karrinyup Country Club, the golf course there. And an incredible job. When my clients bought that property, it had what was a rather hideous 90s extension whacked on the back of it. And so obviously, in doing so kind of lost that Ivanoff factor to some part of the house. So these guys painstakingly removed that part of the house and went to the State Library, dug out the plans and effectively rebuilt and recreated the back part of the home and restored, stripped back all the ugly tiles and bits and pieces that had sort of been stuck on, covering up all the amazing features that were otherwise perfect as they were. Incredibly respectful, and Ashley and Danielle did an absolutely marvellous job. And so selling that home was a real privilege. It actually went to the most beautiful couple that I know are going to love that home for years to come. We've been super lucky, actually, and continue to be lucky. I often honestly, I rest my head at night just feeling so grateful for those homes that we get to sell, because it makes certainly rocking up on home open weekend pretty fun.
We don't really ever do plugs on this podcast. That's the point of it. But I do believe in you, and I do believe you do a great job selling the properties to sell. So anyone out there listening who's got a special home, a home that should have its own name, I suggest that Danielle would be the agent for you.
Thank you so much, Trent.
Thanks for coming
on,
mate. Appreciate the stories.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!